Like, don't lie to yourself saying, like, I can make this sound like that at the mix. No, you can't. You record something, and that's what it's going to sound like, at least to a degree. And no matter what you do in the mix, the source is always going to dictate the end result.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedikt. If you are new to this show, welcome. So stoked to have you. This is the place where we teach you how to get exciting sounding results from your home studio. If you are already a listener, thank you for returning. Thank you for coming back. We always appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with us for so many episodes now. If you have listened to more than just a few, thanks so much. Now, this show is available on both YouTube as well as like all the podcast platforms. So it's a podcast first, but there's also the video version on YouTube. And if you weren't aware of that, just go to the Self-Recording Band on YouTube. Just type it in, you'll find it. And you can also watch all the episodes, not just listen to them, right? And if you discovered us on YouTube, please know that you can listen on the go in like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you enjoy your podcasts. All right. So as you see today, I'm not here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood, unfortunately. I'm here alone doing a solo episode. I haven't done one of these in a while, but yeah, Malcolm's away for this week, but we're going to do one anyways. And this is a great opportunity for me to share a few things that I wanted to share with you at some point anyways. We've done episodes like this in the past, and people enjoyed them, and they said they were really valuable to them, so I decided to do it again. So this week, I'm going to share the 5 biggest recording mistakes that I've seen this week. As you know, I'm mixing a lot of songs. I mean, as you know, if you're listening to this podcast, you don't know if you just discovered us, but I'm a mixer, a professional mixing engineer. I mix a lot of songs. I've worked with hundreds of bands and labels all around the world, and we're mixing 200 to 300 songs per year here at my studio. And every single week, people send me stuff to mix, right? Sometimes things are tracked in a professional studio and everything's good. Sometimes things are tracked in a professional studio and not everything's good, so even that happens. And then there's, of course, a lot of like DIY productions, right? I love this. I have a like punk rock and hardcore background, so I work with a lot of like independent bands in these genres, then a lot of like independent rock bands as well. And I just love to work with self-recording DIY bands, smaller bands, and so I do a bit of everything, right? As long as it's like kind of in the rock genres. So this week, people also sent me stuff to mix, and those were a few DIY projects. And the thing with DIY projects is that, of course, they are not perfect, and there's a lot that we need to do in the editing and mixing phase of the process. But the better the source tones are, the better the result's going to be, of course. And I want to do this episode to help you avoid those mistakes that I see and hear over and over again in the stuff that people send me. I try to help the artists that we're working with avoid these in the first place as well. Like I always jump on calls with them. I give them guides, how to export, how to prepare their files. If I can, I give them feedback on their productions, recordings, make them re-record things if necessary. But still sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes there's no chance, like no going back. Things can't be re-recorded. Sometimes they get the guides and the feedback and everything, but they still don't know how to do it, or they try but don't really accomplish it. So I don't name names. I don't like want to throw anyone under the bus here. Like these are all great people, great bands that I've worked with, and at the end of the day, everything sounded awesome. But it could have been even better, and the process could have been faster and smoother without those kinds of mistakes. And also, we are a very, very specialized mixing studio for that type of thing. So over the years, we've built workflows and like we offer services that other studios oftentimes don't do or don't do as well. I can confidently say that, to be able to like fix all these common DIY issues, right? So we've come up with workflows and processes for that. We like Thomas, who works with me at the studio, is a phenomenal editing engineer. He's a wizard. He can transform things from like barely usable to, oh, this sounds actually pretty great. I can mix this. And we've done so much of this, and we always go the extra mile, that we can make almost everything sound decent. If not, we tell the artist and we won't do it. But I know for a fact that a lot of our peers don't don't go the extra mile or don't do it like that. I can say that. That's the sad reality. And some of them are not willing to because it's also a lot of effort and you need to put in a lot of time to build all these things. And then the project itself takes longer. And so I totally understand if some people don't do it or charge more money for it. Anyway, we do it all the time. And yeah, so these things ended up sounding great, but it could have been faster. It could have been more frictionless, more seamless, smoother. And it could have been even better without these things. And some of those things, the artist had to redo, re-record stuff and send it over again. So if you want to avoid this, if you want to get the best possible results, and don't make yourself re-record stuff and like save time and everything, this episode's for you. All right, enough of that. Here are the 5 mistakes that I've seen. Please avoid these at all costs. And I know that there's objectively no right or wrong in like music and music recording. These are, however, things that are generally to be avoided. Like these things, there's no advantage to those, like if you do them. These are, no matter your genre, no matter your vision or your aesthetic, just don't do these, all right? Cool. Avoid these 5 things. Number 1, octopus drums. So, one project I worked on, and this is very common, they have programmed drums and the person programming the drums was not a drummer. They wanted it to sound like a drummer though, so it was not like a electronics kind of thing where it didn't matter that it was not realistic. The goal was to have a realistic sounding drum kit. That's important to know. But the person programming the drums was not a drummer and wasn't able to think like a drummer and ignored a couple of things here and there. And it was a mix of pre-made loops that he used and then also a couple of things that he programmed himself. And at the end of the day, he sent me something where, no drummer would have been able to play that, right? And it was not intentional. That's the important thing about it. So I'm saying octopus drums because in order to play what he's programmed, you would have to have, 3 arms and 5 legs or something, depending on the part. So if you program drums, if you're not a drummer, then please analyze drum performances first. Please start by using pre-made loops and modifying them if you want, but like don't go too far. Like trust that some people who are drummers or think like drummers have built something that works and only change stuff that makes sense and have a look at like what drummers actually do, how they play fills, and then just think about how many arms and legs you have and if what you programmed is realistic to play. Like that's the minimum thing you can do even if you're not a drummer. So in this case, we had fills where at the end of a very fast fill where it's almost impossible to hit that last hit anyways that he programmed, it was like a crash and a snare, and then both toms and the kick drum and I don't know what else at the same time, which is not possible, right? Sometimes there were fills where a crazy fast kick drum pattern happened at the same time with like a roll with the hands, and then also somehow the hi-hat pedal was going, and then there were crashes in between at the same time as those rolls, and stuff like that. It might sound cool when you listen to it the first time, but it also sounds pretty cheesy and obviously not realistic. And if the goal is to have a realistic drum performance, just avoid these things, right? And it sounds so obvious, but it happens all the time that people send me programmed drums where there's 6, 7, 8 hits, 8 MIDI notes happening at the same time, but we only have like 2 arms and 2 legs, right? So I'm repeating myself. You get the idea. But even if it's not the octopus thing, sometimes things are just not possible to play and sound pretty insane, and maybe show it to a drummer friend or watch a bunch of YouTube videos of drummers of how they actually do fills. Sometimes it's just not possible to go from here to here super fast and at the same time, sometimes it's the cross arm thing that's not possible. Things like that. Just think through what the drummer, like how the drums would be set up and what the drummer would do and how fast they can be. And when in doubt, show it to a drummer friend. So unrealistic drum programming when it's supposed to be realistic. That's the number 1 thing. Problem number 2, out of phase guitar mics. Very common as well. I got a great session to mix. Sounds was great, vibe was great, but something was off with the guitar tone and it sounded kind of hollow and weird. And I was like, hey, and it was just one track that was called amp. And I was like, can it be that there's more than one mic on this amp? And and then the artist said, yeah, we mic'd it with 2 mics. And then I asked how they positioned them. And it turned out that the mics had like a different distance to the cab, and it was not really intentional. They just thought they wanted more depth by pulling one mic back a little bit, but it was not so far back that it's an actual room mic. It was just back a little bit, and and then they summed it and recorded the sum of those 2 mics, unfortunately, so I couldn't do anything about it. The problem is if you have 2 mics at the same source, and the capsules are not aligned, but you pull one back and there is a difference between the two mics, then the sound arrives like at one mic a little earlier compared to the other mic. Like at this mic, it arrives later. And so what that does is it causes the waveforms to overlap in a weird way so that it cancels out in certain areas of the frequency spectrum, and you get what's called comb filtering. And I just saw this fascinating video, by the way, on social media. I don't know who. I think some Pro Tools account. Someone shared it, but it showed two SM57s on a cab and a frequency graph above it, and then they played some guitar riffs, and then they pulled back the one of the SM57s, and you could hear how the sound changes while they pull back the mic, and you can see the dip in the frequency spectrum move across the spectrum, like it sounds like a filter sweep or like a phaser kind of effect. This is basically what it is. So you only get the full representation without any weird dips in the spectrum when the two mics are aligned. And so you can do that intentionally if you like the phasing effect, but most of the times it's not. And you'd have to be super intentional and know what you're doing to do that. And usually it just results in a hollow sound because a part of the spectrum is going to be missing. In this case, a part of the mid-range was missing and it sounded really weird and was not upfront and like lacking a lot of the character. So long story short, I asked them to re-record or re-amp in this case, which was possible, luckily, because they had a DI. So they re-amped it, ran it through the amp again, aligned the microphones, and sent me that. And then the funny thing is, they aligned the microphones, but then I also asked for the individual mics recordings, and then we ended up deciding that just one of them sounded better than the two combined, or like the two combined were not necessary. So we ended up just using even one, because that's going to be the most direct, accurate representation of the guitar tone anyways. And if you find a really good spot on the cab, that's all you need. And in this case, the one mic was better even when the capsules were aligned. So out of phase guitar mics, very important. If you don't know what you're doing there, if you're unsure, just record both tracks and don't sum them before you record. All right. Because I have to add this, because if you record both tracks, you can then later align them in the DAW and sometimes save the recording by aligning the mics in the DAW. Doesn't always work like aligning the mics, but it can. And so when in doubt, record two tracks. It's usually usable then. Okay. Mistake number 3. Artifacts and heavy processing in vocal tracks. I had 2 sessions this week where the artist decided, or I don't know if it was a decision, but they sent me the vocal track with heavy processing on it, with lots of like stereo effects and phasing and like delays and compression and whatnot. And like if that's cool and you want that, then I get it, and it might make sense to you to send it like that. The problem is if I try to make it sit in the mix, I will probably have to compress it, or I probably have to do something to it. It won't work exactly the way it is because it's all about the context, and that will change the chain that you set up anyways, and not to the better usually. So if you bake the reverb into the vocal and a delay and whatnot, and then I have to compress the vocal, the reverb will just come up and it will be way more reverb than what you had. If I have to EQ the vocal because of how it sits in the mix, it might make the reverb tail sound weird and like all these things. So if you want specific effects and you are afraid that the mixer is not going to be able to do that in the same way or better, then by all means include the effects, like the track with the effects on it, but also print a dry track so that we have control over the dry track. We have the wet track as a reference. We can use the wet track with the processing if we need, but we always have the dry track as well to either blend in or go back to. But without the dry track, there's really only so much we can do. And most of the time, it's not, those decisions that have been made are not the best for the mix. They are, just a draft basically, or an idea. It's not what you should use in the mix. So please send both if you do that. And also, if you're mixing yourself, please start the mix with a dry thing available and don't print the effects and then start mixing, because your decisions are going to change based on the context of the mix and all the other mixing decisions, especially with things like delays and reverb. If there's a phaser or some kind of that kind of effect, I mean, if you really want it or you record it through a pedal or something weird like that, cool. I mean, that can work. But like things that have a tail, like reverbs and delays, very, very careful. Also stereo, really careful. Like sometimes I get these wide stereo vocals where there's no center information almost. I had this one time this week where usually, you want a clear focal point. And if the vocals are the most important thing and the focal point of the song, I need a center vocal, right? At least, maybe not in every part, but like if all I have is like this very wide stereo vocal, which is very unusual and uncommon, and then I also have super wide stereo guitars and everything, like there's nothing up the middle. And there's so much space in the middle where the vocal usually sits. But if I don't have a mono vocal recording, and the recording of a vocal is always mono by default with a mic, and if I don't have that because you've widened it and spread it and used all kinds of effects, the vocal's never going to be up front and center and clear. It's always going to be blended in with the guitars, and usually that's not what people want. So give me a dry mono vocal, or use a dry mono vocal for yourself for the mix, and then do whatever you want in terms of processing and blend it in. You can also send the dry vocal, by the way, and print the effects tracks on separate tracks, and then you can upload or send a dry vocal track plus the reverb plus the delay plus whatever. If they are on effects returns, that's the proper way to do it anyways, not using inserts for that, but like effects tracks, send and return, and then you print the returns and you include them in the upload, or you print them and import them into your mixing session. So yeah, you can do that. The artifacts on the vocal, I mentioned that too. Sometimes people record vocals and then they edit and tune or fix a few things and don't realize that they're adding a lot of like weird artifacts to their vocals. There might be cuts during a breath. There might be clicks and pops. There might be tuning artifacts. Sometimes I get vocals that are a WAV file, but they sound like an MP3. Whatever it is, it could be reflections from your room that sound weird. It could be, I don't know, just make sure that it's a really clean, or not clean. Clean's the wrong word. If it doesn't have to be clean, it doesn't have to be clean. Like it's a good recording of whatever you want to record. But I mean, like no artifacts and no effects in there that are not 100% intentional. That's what I'm saying. So if your vocal sounds like a cheap MP3 and that's not what you want, change something about it. Figure out what it is, ask, and then change it. And you're going to hear it if you pay attention. If the vocal, just compare it to references, right? You'll hear that your vocal is lacking severely compared to these, if that's the case. If you have tuning artifacts, if it sounds like an auto-tune effect, and you don't want that, don't tune it and let the engineer tune it, or ask how to do it, or learn how to do it. But definitely don't send a track full of artifacts. If there's clicks and pops, or if you cut like in a sloppy way during breaths or whatever, make sure that stuff is accurate. Go the extra mile there. Check every cut. Make sure there are crossfades and fades. Don't cut into the sound. Cut when there's silence. If you have to cut into the sound, make a good fade and a transition, and make sure everything sounds natural. If you close your eyes and listen to the vocal performance, there shouldn't be anything distracting in it. It should sound like a person singing into a microphone, right? And if there's anything obviously chopped up and weird, you don't want that, unless it's intentional. I always have to say that. Okay, mistake number 4. Too much bleed in drum close mics, which is a result of not hitting hard enough, or a drum tuning that is just too dead and lifeless. I've had this week where the drum performance was great in terms of timing. The engineering of the overheads, the room, everything was good. Mic placement was good. There was no phase issues. Drum choice was great. Cymbal choice was great. Writing, arrangement, everything was great. But in all the close mics, like the snare mic and the toms, I had way too much cymbal information and not enough of the actual drums. And the reason was that the person was, first of all, not hitting the snare and toms hard enough. It was an aggressive punk rock song. They're supposed to hit the shells, so that they can sing and open up and just be loud and punchy and powerful. And they just didn't hit it hard enough. But they hit the cymbals pretty hard. And the cymbals sounded great. They hit it the right way, but they would have had to hit the drums way harder for that to work. The drums are just very soft compared to the cymbals, and that results in a lot of cymbal noise in those close mics. And if I want to turn up the snare or the toms to make them louder, I also bring up all the cymbal noise, and it will never sound really powerful anyways, because if you don't hit a drum hard, it doesn't sound like you hit it hard, no matter how loud you turn it up. Part 2 of this problem was that the drum tuning was not right for the song. They just muffled it way too much. It was really dead. The snare was just a very short, almost like a, I don't know, electronic kind of, gated snare thing where it was like a very short and very dead, no overtones, nothing. And it's super hard to make that work in a mix. It's almost impossible, right? If you don't get the crack, the stick attack, and then the shell that opens up and the explosion of a rock snare drum or a punk rock snare drum, it just won't cut through the mix. Listen to all your favorite references in any kind of heavy rock genre. you won't hear a very short, very dead drum unless it's intentional. And even then, it's probably not like super dead. And then the balance between the cymbals and that needs to work. So again, listen to a lot of references to really know what I'm talking about here, and then compare it to your own drum recording. And if you solo a snare drum and you hear a lot of cymbals and hi-hat, and the snare itself is just this very short blip, and it's like almost like just hitting a piece of cardboard, then it's just not going to work. So, and even if the tuning's perfect and then you muffle it too much, you can ruin it totally. So avoid that. Same with the toms. If you play like fast rolls, sometimes it can be that it's hard to hit them hard. But again, that's what it takes. A good drummer, those are almost like athletes. They hit the drums really hard, even when it's a fast roll. And when people tell you you're playing too loud, you got to play more controlled, that's complete bullshit in like the heavy rock genres. Hit the crap out of these shells, please. Control the cymbals, yes, but even on like hard accents, you can smash those as well. Control the hi-hats, especially if they're open, yeah. So it needs to be intentional and controlled, that's what I'm saying. But please, smash the crap out of these shells, unless it's a very, quiet part or ghost notes or whatever. Of course, there can be dynamics, but look at any really great drummer in any heavy genre and show me someone who's playing softly and quietly, right? And like even probably one of the most controlled punk rock drummers I know, Bill Stevenson from like the Descendants, Black Flag. If you watch him play, it looks very controlled, and I've mixed him live, and I've seen it firsthand. And I've even talked to him about this. He doesn't hit super hard. He hits like medium hard. It doesn't look like that because his playing style is very effortless, and he has great technique. So his left hand is like, he's barely moving when he's playing drums, but what the power he gets just out of his wrist here and the way he plays it is like actually pretty hard. It just looks effortless. But the thing is, his cymbals are even more controlled than the left hand. So he plays a little quieter overall with a perfect balance within the kit. So yeah, he looks like he's playing controlled. He is quieter than some of the other heavier drummers, but the balance between the shells and the cymbals is correct. And he doesn't want that super hard sound. He wants like the medium hard kind of sound, and he does that perfectly. And he also has the cymbals like very close to the close mics and the shells, which is a nightmare for an engineer, but he plays it so controlled, and also his parts are arranged in such a smart way that this is not a problem, right? So he doesn't like smash the right cymbal right before he does a roll on the floor tom, where all this bleed will go into the floor tom mic. These things, like, you got to think this through. And so yeah, hit the shells hard enough, control the cymbals, and check the close mics and see if you're actually recording toms or if it's more cymbals with a bit of toms in there. All right. Mistake number 5. Your vision is unclear and what you want to achieve doesn't match what you actually recorded. So I had this also once this week and then a couple of weeks before. It was a longer project where the band told me they wanted dry, direct, AC/DC kind of classic rock drums, where those are a little drier. They are, like the AC/DC, like a fat snare drum, basically a lower tuned kind of fat snare drum, not the stadium type, room or reverb thing, like controlled, a little bit of room, but like pretty dry and up front, dry, fat. Those are the best words I can describe it. Still, there's a shell. It's not muffled like crazy, of course, but it's like listen to AC/DC, but back in black. That kind of was the reference. Okay, so they wanted that. They sent me recordings of the drums, though, where I was like, interesting, because the playing was flawless. No problem with that. The sound that they've recorded, the engineering, flawless. Really great job. The room, flawless. The tuning, everything, perfect. Like, it was a really, really good professional drum recording. The only thing that was lacking, I get to this because this is actually part of this. One thing was lacking, but overall it was a perfect recording. But the tuning of the snare did not at all match this reference that they had. And so they had this kind of funky, high-pitched snare drum with lots of overtones. It was played perfectly. The tuning also was good. It worked for that recording. Like, if they hadn't told me about the reference, I would be like, well, that's perfect. It also matched the songs, in my opinion, because it was not AC/DC. It was not classic rock. It was like very complex. It had like elements of funk and other influences in it. It was prog and like long songs and complex, like really well thought out music. Like there were synthesizers, clean guitars, and like layers upon layers of things, and then organs and like all kinds of things, and complex fills, and so it clearly wasn't AC/DC. It didn't have the vibe of AC/DC, but they wanted this kind of drums. So my challenge was to combine what they had recorded with what they wanted and figure out why they wanted those drums, even if it's a different style. It ended up working well because I blended in other samples. I tuned their recording after the fact, which can be done, but you have to be very careful. And I created a new sound in the mix that was still close to what they've recorded. It sounded like a totally natural performance, but it was a little more dry, a little fatter, a little more in the AC/DC direction while still serving the song. So that was kind of the balance, and they loved it at the end. But the thing is, I don't know what exactly happened in this case. Maybe it's been recorded a long time ago and they now just wanted to try a different sound, but it's already recorded. But if you want an AC/DC drum sound, tune your drums like that. Like listen to the reference a lot and then do that. And this was just one example. This happens all the time where there's this disconnect between the reference and the vision and then what they actually record. So people will tell me a lot of times what they want to sound like. Sometimes even in the references, I get 5 totally different things. It turns out that it's not really references, it's just songs the band likes, and they say that's our reference. But like, what I'm saying is this disconnect between the vision, the references, and what you actually record. Please have a clear vision. Listen carefully to other songs that you like, if you have any references. Listen carefully to those and figure out if your songs are actually somewhat like that and would benefit from similar tones, or if your songs need something completely different, maybe something unique, hopefully something unique, and make sure that what you record matches the vision you have for it, because the sound doesn't happen in the mix. The sound happens at the source. We can only do so much in the mix. And if you're mixing yourself, it's the same thing. Don't trick yourself. Like, don't lie to yourself saying, like, I can make this sound like that at the mix. No, you can't. You record something, and that's what it's going to sound like, at least to a degree. And no matter what you do in the mix, the source is always going to dictate the end result. And it's not getting it right creating the sound in the mix is not a thing. The sound is created at the source. It's created when you choose your samples or your virtual instruments, or you record the real thing, you put the mic on something. I don't care if it's computer music, electronic music done on the laptop, or if it's a band that you record with mics. The sound happens when you choose your sounds, when you capture them, when you program them, when you put the mic on it. And then at some point, that's committed, that's recorded, that's going to be printed from MIDI, whatever. And then you're mixing. And then you have to work with those sounds. That is mixing. If you go back in the mix and constantly change the source tones, like with programming, for example, that's not mixing, that's producing. And you'll never get into a good mixing flow, by the way, if you do that. So if you're producing in the box and everything's programmed in digital, you still commit that at some point. You print it, you say, that's my recording. Then you move on to the mix, you mix it. And because mixing is a different mindset. Mixing is not about choosing a different virtual instrument. No. Or a different amp sim. No. So please do that. Do yourself a favor. Commit where your producer had. Be like, that's the sound we want. That's committed. Then we can move on to the mix. And if you collaborate with a mixer, you have to do that anyways. So yeah. That was number 5. The one thing that was also lacking in this example that I wanted to get to is they also didn't have close mics on the toms for whatever reason, so they only were in the overhead. So we had to extract MIDI from the overhead track and then trigger tom samples that were very similar to what they recorded, and then create our own tom tracks as if they were recorded. And it worked well. It sounds awesome. Nobody will ever know. But it was this extra step where I was like, if I want AC/DC drums and I want these dry upfront fills and stuff, or these tom accents, and they had a lot of fills and stuff in there, then I need tom close mics. It doesn't work with just the overheads, right? So that was another thing. But who knows what the reason for that was. And again, all of these bands are awesome. All of these artists are awesome. I love working with them. I love the result. They love the result. But you could make your life so much easier. You can get to the result faster. You can get even better results if you avoid mistakes like that. And that's why I wanted to go through it. All right, I hope this was helpful. I know it's been a short, fast, hopefully somewhat to the point episode. Let me know if that was helpful. I might do one of that every once in a while. And so, yeah, please comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Please leave a review If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, this really helps us reach more people like you, so please do that. And if you want to make sure that you don't make any of these mistakes and like the dozens of others that I see every single week or month, then please go to the selfrecordingband.com and apply for our coaching program, the Self-Recording Syndicate. Because in there, I personally guide you through writing, arranging, recording, editing, mixing, mastering, the whole thing, even including like drum setup, instrument setup, mic positioning, the sound check, like all the phases of like making a record. I guide you through those depending on where you are right now. We're going to start wherever your current project is or the next project you want to work on. Then we'll move it through this process. I guide you. I'm by your side every step of the way. You can upload things all the time. You get my personal feedback. You get next steps. You get playbooks that teach you exactly how to do all these things. You get like everything you could imagine from a mentor. Like you get a recording buddy who's with you every single day whenever you need him and guides you through making your next record. I don't know any other like thing like that out there. We're friends with a lot of like course creators and educators and awesome people on the internet. Nobody does a program like we do. It's really unique. It's really in depth. It's a lot of our personal time and attention. That's why it's also very limited in terms of how many people we can serve. That's why you need to apply and can't just buy the thing or like sign up for it. And also, when you apply, it's like no pressure, no strings attached. You apply, we look at the application. Then if we accept the application, we do a free call with you, a free coaching call where we take an hour, sometimes 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, depending. And we're going to look at your situation right now, at your setup, at what your current skill level is, what you're trying to do, what your goals are. And if you have any recordings already, I'm going to listen to the recordings. And then we talk about how you can get from where you are to where you want to be with your recordings. Some people's goal is to become a professional engineer. Other people want to other people want to make their next record of their band sound amazing. Some people do it for self-actualization. Some people have career goals as musicians. It's completely different. But like we're going to look at all of that. We talk about how you can get from where you are to wherever you want to be and whether or not we can help you with that. And then we will offer you either a spot in the Self-Recording Syndicate, the program that I talked about, or a custom solution that works for you. So if the program is too much money for you and you just can't commit, or if, maybe you are already there, you just want to finish this record, it's already mixed, and there's a couple of tweaks maybe you need to do, and maybe, a couple of sessions or like even just one session looking over your shoulder, giving you feedback on the mix, maybe that's all you need, and then it's the thing's done and you don't have another project coming up. Then there's a solution for that as well. If you're just starting out and you don't have a clue about anything and you're afraid that like you want to build the basic skill set first, we have solutions for that too. And if the better option for you is to just go to a studio and hire someone instead of doing it yourself, or if you're lacking in a certain area so much that we can't really help you at the moment, I will tell you that as well. I will be honest. I will be like, hey, in your case, I would just go to a studio. Or in your case, I would just practice XYZ and then come back. So no strings attached, no pressure. I'm not selling this program to everybody on this call. I honestly just want to look at where you are, want to analyze your situation, want to talk about your music, your goals, find the best solution for you. Doesn't have to be one that we offer, just whatever the best solution for you is, and then leave you with that plan. And then you can decide if one of our offerings is a great fit and you want to continue and implement the plan that we made together, if you want to implement that with us, or if you just take the plan and go somewhere else or try on your own. You're definitely going to leave this call with more clarity, and you're definitely going to get a plan and a roadmap. That's why this call is called Clarity Call. And I'd love to see you apply for this. I'd love to talk to you about this. And again, the link is theselfrecordingband.com. You can look through this page, scroll down, read through how the program works and all of that. But even if you don't even have to, you just click the apply button. It takes you to a quick form. You fill that form out. I'm going to have a look at it. I'm going to listen to your music, and then I'm going to send you a link to book the Clarity Call. All right, enough of that. I'd love to talk to you. And also see you next week with another interview episode, by the way. All right. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.